Hi everyone, this is Dr. Zeus Amionis, otherwise known as Citizen Zeus, in my investigative capacity as a not as a journalist, but as a kind of citizen investigator with a background in science and with training also and looking at uh, how culture itself begins to skew debates about things like COVID-19. Again, most of what we do and most of what I do is not what I would call technically predictions. They're more along the lines of looking through the clutter and the haze of what's going on now to really find out and to determine what's at the core of something. A lot of times what is considered predictions ends up not being prediction at all, but just the ability to clearly see the present and how it's going to play out and to have a regard for the past. And if we study our past and we see that what's happening in the present is a different form, oftentimes, of what's already happened in the past, and we clearly see the present and where it's leading us, oftentimes we can make good quote unquote predictions. Those predictions are nothing more than clear seeing in the present and understanding where it's going to head. So I don't consider myself a soothsayer or a seer of the future as much as I am more of a seer and articulator of the present and how it's playing out, especially given our past patterns. So in doing this, I'm going to put myself in the corner here. On July 23rd, of this year, 2020, I gave several predictions. Now, again, these were not predictions per se. They were clearly seeing the present informed by the past. And and these are proving to be true. And these last couple of months, most of these quote unquote predictions are bearing themselves out. Now, they weren't strictly predictions. I just saw from an informed past where things were going. And let's go ahead and review those real quick. The different strains of COVID-19 viruses will continue to mutate, become more communicable and less deadly over time. Viruses can't live in dead bodies. That was one of my predictions / observations. That's proving to be true. More and more studies are coming out showing that these viruses are mutating. They're mutating rather slowly. And for the most part, they are not getting more deadly. We have, and I'll show this, they have a strain on the East Coast that came through Europe, which is more deadly and creates deeper symptoms, and the one on the West Coast that came from China, which is more mild and doesn't appear to do it. And we will see the map on that. I said there would be a second wave of COVID-19, not as big or as bad as the first in terms of fatality, because isolation will not be effective and people will not have permanent immunity. I will show you articles that show that people do not have permanent immunity, especially if they're exposed to the one on the West Coast, like one person was, and then exposed to one from the East Coast, the two different strains. We already have evidence that at least one person in the United States ended up having greater, because the one on the East Coast is more deadly and is harsher. It is possible to have one and not have that immunity transfer to the other strain. And finally, but I said also that the Swedish model will not be a cautionary table. That there's so much fear around the Swedes allowing, again, it's over-exaggerated. They still took best practices to limit their exposure, to limit the spread, to make sure that the curve didn't overwhelm their medical capacity. But basically, they're saying we need to be able to expose our population to this, remove our most vulnerable people, that is the people that are much older, and then allow our bodies and trust our bodies to deal with this. Now, if you combine this with my last video on vitamin therapy and the promise that has for helping people maintain their health in the face of exposure, then you've got a good combination here. Again, I make no claims here, medical claims about just doing one versus the other. I like to take a comprehensive approach, evaluate them, and integrate them. What things work and how, and bring the best parts of those together. So again, don't see this as medical advice, but see this as information only. There will be no effective vaccine or once and for all cure for COVID-19. Again, we don't, and just as there was not for HIV or herpes. Now, we don't have that confirmed yet, but I will make this claim right now. We do not have a vaccine for HIV that's effective. We do not have one for herpes. We tried one for Zika, another blood/nerve/, immune disease, and it turned out that that so-called vaccine was oftentimes more harmful. This is down in South America and Central America than not having one at all. And we also tried one for dengue, and they practiced that on the Philippine children. And they some 100,000 doses were administered on that. They had to stop the trial and put a stop to the development of that vaccine because it ended up killing 600 Filipino children because of something called antibody-dependent enhancement. It set a person up, something about the way it triggered the immune system for an inflammatory response that was deadly when that child was exposed in the future to the disease in the wild. We have to make sure that the cure is not worse than the disease. I do believe that vaccines can provide immune therapy if done right. But the way in which they're produced from a massively profitable for-profit corporate industry puts so many bad things in there and substitutes the response of the immune system, oftentimes inflammatory, for the effective response of the immune. It's not the amount, it's not the quantity of response, it is the quality of response that matters. If you have too much of a quantity of response in immune therapy by just stimulating an inflammatory immune engagement, you can create more danger because you can overwhelm the system. It almost becomes like an autoimmune disease where the inflammation created by that induced vaccine generated immune response can shut down organs, and oftentimes also with COVID have a clotting complications that become more dangerous than the management of the virus alone by other means. That's always going to be a problem. And I said here that SARS-CoV-2 will act more like herpes than a flu, staying in our bodies and being managed by good health practices. It will go away. It will not go away in a year or two, but lessen in severity over time through mutation and management with good health and lowered emotional stress. I do believe this virus is the great revealer, that it's showing us that the only real way forward is for us to take full responsibility for our health, do good health practices that lower inflammation, stresses, and free radicals in the body, and help fitness, sleep, hydration, exercise, plant-based whole foods diets, meaningful work and social connections, embracing those and getting rid of the bad health practices, emotional stresses, junk foods, electronic and environmental pollutants, and toxins. And here's another thing I wanted to say also that I brought up in my other one of my other videos. COVID-19 was not about conquering COVID-19. It was not about hiding from COVID-19. It was always about keeping COVID-19 under the dotted line of medical capacity. We know it's going to run through the population. We cannot escape it. But we want to be able to draw it out in such a way that it doesn't overwhelm our medical capacity, and to draw it away in our own bodies. We have the same curve where it draws it out in our body so it doesn't go over our body's capacity to deal with it, create serious damage to our body or even death. By using these different therapies that I've talked about in the past to help manage that inflammatory response and increase the body's own strength in dealing with it, what we do is in our own bodies, we go ahead and bring that curve underneath our body's capacity. In our society, same thing. By not freaking out, by taking some best practices around, to a certain degree mask, to a certain degree physical distancing, which some people call social distancing, and to a certain degree creating healthy lifestyles and so forth, we are going to manage that so that we don't have to worry about that as much. At the same time, we have our most vulnerable populations, those that are 80 and over for the most part. We take special care so that they don't simply get exposed to this disease, which seems to really target that population. So I said, hiding is not going to do it. There is no escape or medical cure. So we go on, and again, these new articles are suggesting or confirming that my so-called predictions, which was not really a prediction. You have to understand that, and I showed this in another video, that 2/3 of the world under 50 has herpes 1, okay? Another study showed that in healthy people with no symptoms, many had found papillovirus, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, the HIV, the AIDS virus in them, among other things, showing that over time we learn to adapt and create some kind of equilibrium with diseases that can be deadly when we're out of balance, but that over time become less deadly. I looked up on HIV because I think it is so similar to what we're going on with now with regard to the hysteria. And HIV statistics, the hysteria is very much like COVID-19. Early on, people thought you couldn't kiss somebody with HIV, that you couldn't sit next to them. If they spit on you, you could get it. Remember that, if you are old enough to remember that. That was about 40 years ago in the mid-80s, okay? 35, 40 years ago. Now, first of all, we found out it was all hysteria. Just like with COVID-19, the initial death rate was very high because the vulnerable populations, those with that high-risk behaviors, including people with certain sexual practices and intravenous drug users, and a lot of them oftentimes in very unhealthy lifestyle situations. And I'm not talking about the sexual choices. I'm talking about the use of drugs. I'm talking about diet and then these other things, created a place for for the HIV virus to really have effect. And those people died quickly and in ways that caused panic throughout the entire population. 35 years later, 35 to 40 years later, we now only have 15 to 16,000 people, this is in 2018, dying with HIV, even not from HIV, but with HIV. And only like 34,000 new cases. In the younger population, to also verify this, in the younger population, almost half oftentimes aren't even displaying symptoms so that they know that they have it. So over time, if we don't panic and we manage this, yes, the initial stuff is devastating, and I'm not reducing the severity or the importance of protecting vulnerable populations. And in here, it's very clear who the vulnerable populations are. People above 80 and people with underlying health conditions like diabetes and obesity that deplete vitamins and deplete your body's ability to respond effectively to the challenge presented by COVID-19. Now, you see things like this on the news all the time. Oh my God, we went through the first hump and now we have even a bigger one, just like the Spanish flu. But these are number of cases, okay? What are the actual death rates? Let's go down. First of all, I wanted to pass through here too. You notice that the East Coast is really getting it a lot more and a lot more severely. Again, remember this strain of COVID-19 came mostly through Europe, okay? And it is harsher, okay? The one on the West, not so much. That's the one that came from China, okay? And again, these two don't necessarily give you immunity to each other. So if you're traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast, you've already had COVID-19 and a fairly mild one, it's still possible for you to get the other strain, apparently. At least the initial indicators are that. Again, a lot of this is alarmism, cases going lower and staying low, cases that are high and going higher. Okay, but here's the important thing as we go down. Okay, here are the reported new cases. We had a huge uptick in reported cases. Now, reported deaths. It's exactly the opposite. As we cleared through the really vulnerable populations, and this includes, convalescent homes, elderly homes, and so forth, okay? Things went down. We had a big jump in cases, mainly among younger people, by the way. And did we have that much of a jump in actual deaths? The answer is no. What will happen in the future is we're going to have another bump, okay? This one will bump. Since we've got so many new cases here, it may not be as high. I suspect it will be higher than this initial bump, but say it is higher, okay? More cases, you're going to see another bump down here, and it's going to be lower. That is the prediction, and that is already what this trend is bearing out. So we can go ahead and stay tuned on that one, okay? Now let's go here to the New York Post. The New York Post is a little bit of a tabloid, I guess, but they're still referring to an actual news article. Um, uh, Chinese doctors sounding the alarm on coronavirus say the illness could be even deadlier for patients who catch it again. Again, we don't know if that's simply catching another strain that has greater symptoms. But the fact is, what this is proving, as I said in my predictions, is there will be no lasting immunity. Just as in the population, my prediction is when people get herpes, for instance, usually they have bad symptoms, and then the next time it happens to be less, and the next time less, and your body develops equilibrium with it, and oftentimes people after an initial few outbreaks don't have them after that, or have them only when they're in cases where their health and emotional stress is compromised. Okay, like shingles, for instance, which is another form of herpes. Okay, herpes zoster. It's when emotional stress happens, people are not sleeping, people are not taking care of themselves, then it comes out opportunistically and teaches that person to get their health in order, to get to sleep, and so forth. COVID-19 will likely be this same kind of thing. Hydration, sleep, exercise, certain kinds of vitamins, and treating yourself well. And that may be one of the big benefits of people coming out of work. They were able to get sleep and able to do these things and may have provided an unintentional protective effect against COVID-19. So again, we have confirmed that you can be reinfected. You do not have necessarily lasting immunity, not only because there are different strains of this virus, okay, like the one on the East Coast versus the one on the West Coast, the European-derived strain, and the one that was derived straight from China, or on the West Coast. But that, and I've claimed this, much like herpes and HIV, we do not have vaccines against those because they live in the body. They can't just be cleaned out. Once they get in, they stay in. And then they become managed and they learn to develop a somewhat collaborative relationship. And this is showing to be the same kind. Now, of course, we're still in the fear-based stage here. And it said the scary thing finally happened. Someone caught the coronavirus twice and got sicker the second time around. A 25-year-old man in Nevada got COVID-19 in March, got better in April, and got sick again in May. He had worse symptoms in the second bout, bad enough that he had to be hospitalized. So 3 other confirmed reinfections also reported this week, 1 in Hong Kong and 2 in Europe. And they don't necessarily make me any more worried about our vaccine prospects, though, and they don't mean that the pandemic will go on forever. Okay, but again, this is lending more credence to the fact that a vaccine, because it's in the same class as the Zika, in the same class as the dengue, in the same class as HIV and herpes, it's a blood virus. You can look at my other videos to show that. It's an immune system affecting virus. It's even a nerve oriented virus, just that can be affected by your moods and your stresses. Okay, if we took that seriously, we would develop a regimen around this, around reducing emotional stress, getting sleep, making sure you're hydrated, taking the proper vitamins, doing other things that enhance overall health, like good social connections and so forth. And I would love to see that study done and see how effective it is against all these other exterior pill taking and syringe inducing contrived responses to this significant challenge in our lives. Here we see actual rendering of coronavirus deaths in the European area, United Kingdom, country by country. This is from Statista.com. And again, a lot of people, and this goes back to what I said with Sweden being going to be seen as not a cautionary tale, but actually the way to do business. Take basic common sense approaches that enhance your body's ability to deal with it, create social practices that stop the thread, and quarantines or brings out the most identified vulnerable populations. If you notice, Sweden is not up. Belgium is far greater than Sweden in terms of deaths per 100,000 of population. And I will bet you that Sweden's exposure rate is higher than all the rest of these. It's down around where France is. Obviously, there are other countries, and it would be interesting to investigate them, like Denmark and Germany and so forth. But Sweden is not, by doing their method, among the highest in terms of deaths in the European Union. Now let's go a little bit further. Sweden, again, was considered to be this cautionary tale. If we look at the amount of cases, okay, the cases did spike again, just like most. There's a little one and then a spike, a second one, just like in the United States. And then it kind of evened out. But what happened with deaths? Predictably, just like in the United States, deaths now are about 0 as of September 17th. So again, just as I, quote, predicted, it wasn't a prediction, it was an observation based on seeing how the trends of HIV and herpes and other similar class viruses happened. That's why I'm making the prediction that there will be no effective vaccine, because it follows those same trends and we weren't able to make effective vaccines back then. And I also note that within our bodies and in society, we have to deal with these waves, with the most vulnerable populations being affected the most greatly, so having the highest death rates, and then more cases, but lower death rates, and then maybe even more cases still, or maybe a medium amount of cases and lower death rates still. That's just how the profile continues to work. I defy anyone out there, and if you want to put in the comments below, and again, I encourage everyone to subscribe, where there are exceptions to that basic profile with this class of viruses. I'd love to see that. I don't have to be right in this. I'm just basically making my best guesses, and then not guesses, my best calculations based on the data and based on the integration of information as I go forward. Again, places that are really getting hit now: Georgia, Florida, Texas even, okay? And California, where's California? California's even further down, right? I'm looking down all the way here. I think it's in the 30s. California, where are you, California? Let's see here, California. See if I can find California here. There it is, 35. It's way, way down there in terms of deaths per 100,000, okay? Georgia, 57, it's more, okay? Mississippi is more, and so forth. Louisiana, these are the ones that really got hit, including Florida recently, have had these huge upticks. But if you notice, they're nowhere near as much as New Jersey and New York. What this suggests is that when you have a new or novel coronavirus, you go ahead and you do basically address it early on. You don't simply let it linger. New Jersey and New York had mass transit, people in close quarters, breathing on one another, and they didn't take that immediate action. And as a result, they had a huge uptick at the very beginning that caused their deaths per 100,000 to be, frankly, 5 times what it is in California, which is having a big uptick now. Making sure you have an immediate initial response seems to be the most important indicator, okay? Even though New York has given all this great press, look at them, as well as New Jersey, way, way higher death rate per 100,000 than the rest of the states. So it's very important to respond quickly. And then, once you've responded quickly, to find best practices and move on. That will allow the death rate to be the least. Okay, look, okay, what New York looks like right now. And you look at this graph and say, oh, New York's doing a great job. No, they're not. They were one of the worst in the country, with New Jersey far above the rest when it came to deaths per 100,000 because they didn't manage it in the front end. Okay, you manage it on the front end. Okay, if you don't manage it on the front end, you get a lot of deaths. Okay. You begin to manage a little better on the front end, you get fewer deaths. And we noticed that California had a big uptick in terms of deaths as well. Big uptick, but these are just graphs. They aren't to scale. The number of people actually dying are, especially per 100,000, are much less. Okay, and you can go down here and see deaths per 100,000, and you notice New York and New Jersey are right up there. So again, don't allow yourself to be swayed. This is Placer County where I live. It's a county of 400,000 people. And guess what? 3,400 total cases, okay? And only 41 total deaths. In this first little bump here, okay? This first little bump, as you see down here, in new cases, okay? There were something on the order of 9 to 12 deaths just in that little bump. From all the rest of this, okay, we have maybe 30 more deaths, okay? So again, cases are skyrocketing, even in planet. And where are they skyrocketing among? People 18 to 49. Why are there no deaths? Let's click on hospitalization and deaths. Because we understand the virus, okay? We understand it. Let me go see it. Let me see if I can move this on down or move it up. Yeah, here we go, okay? Why? Because all the deaths occurred from people 50 and above. The vast majority of them 65 and above. 0 deaths in people below 50. So this is a very, very tailored virus. It's not just people 65 and above, but people 80 and above that are overwhelmingly represented. It's people who are already in many ways on their last legs, and this virus is helping them out the door a little sooner. Doesn't mean I'm in favor of this virus. That doesn't mean I don't value the precious last months or years of a person's life. But it helps us understand the virus and not to freak out so much. So we move on to the next here. I'm going to go ahead and move this back up again so you can actually see. Excess deaths tally is 204,000 in 7 months, so COVID-19 deaths might be undercounted. I want to do this to really challenge the people who brought up some stupid study that said only 6% of the death certificates had only COVID-19 on it. There's one way to really understand how much deaths may be attributable, okay, to COVID-19, okay? And I know there are other factors, but that's excess deaths. How many more deaths than average are we actually having? That way you can't fake it, okay? If anything, deaths should be going down from other causes like car accidents because people are staying home and not engaging in risky activities, okay? Though there are increase in deaths of despair, and maybe, and that was shown also with domestic abuse as people are penned in. So there are some factors there that we can't account for, but for the most part, the overall or excess deaths is a good way to understand, okay, how many more deaths we're getting. And we are getting more excess deaths, over 200,000 excess deaths, 20 or 30,000 more than those attributed to COVID. The CDC, again, talks about excess deaths in this article. I encourage you to look it up, making the same argument. And finally, this one that just says measuring excess mortality gives a clearer picture of the pandemic's true burden, okay? And I happen to agree with that. Excess deaths does help this happen. So what we have here is a virus, as I said at the very beginning, that is a combination, a hybrid of a respiratory virus in the way that it's communicated, and that's why it's communicated so easily, and a blood, immune, and nerve virus in the way that it operates in our body. That's what got us confused. Never before in history that I can see, and again, you can correct me on this, have I seen this hybrid. Usually have HIV and herpes and blood viruses, blood nerve viruses, autoimmune viruses, okay, that go through bodily fluids, sexual fluids, blood, etc. That's how they're transmitted, so they don't communicate very easily. Or you have flu-type viruses, coronaviruses, etc., that go through respiratory. Vaccines tend to be better against them and effective, whereas with the blood viruses, we just don't have effective vaccines against them. They tend to be seasonal, whereas this one was not seasonal. The biggest cases that spiked in the United States were in the hottest times of the year and in the hottest states, okay? So we have more evidence that it's a blood virus that lives in our body because it's not affected by the seasons. It's affected by things like stress, and it's affected by things like vitamin deficiencies, okay? So never before have we had these two come together, and it's not natural for them to come together. And this latest blockbuster, which I will end this video with, now seems to confirm, as I have already said in my video, it's a long video, it's an hour and 40 minutes, but I go through this extensively, that this is a lab-created virus. Never before that I could see in any natural mutation have these two types of viruses come together in the same virus To me, that suggested there had to be artificial manipulation. And now there is a paper out by the person, a Chinese researcher who worked with the person, the main person there, Dr. Li Mengyan, a Chinese virologist, PhD, MD, who fled the country, leaving her job at a prestigious Hong Kong university, appeared last week on British television, where she claimed that SARS-CoV-2, the virus which causes COVID-19, was created by Chinese scientists in a lab. I did the investigation on this in Hybridizing Harm, my other video, which I will append to this one, and I showed exactly why that was likely to occur. And this last analysis, where you see these two classes of viruses coming together in the same one, suggests and certainly seems to confirm that what she's saying is true. She goes through extensively and scientifically to back up not only the logic, but the probabilities and the way in which this virus is acting to affirm that that's the case. Now, and this is in Zero Hedge, but the actual article itself is on ResearchGate. I will try to get that for you, but you can get a link to it in this article in Zero Hedge. Okay. So she basically goes through all the arguments for natural evolution and she debunks them. Remember, this is the person who worked with Zhen Ji, which is the person who is the virologist directly associated with this work in China, who was trying to create excuses for it. And again, remember, it was the United States who gave that technology and farmed it out to them. University of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and their major virologists, as well as Fort Detrick, was in on this. Okay, was it a bioweapon? Again, in this other thing, I claim that it was scientific arrogance and carelessness and greed, trying to patent these things, which is my main drivers here, not bioweaponry. But it doesn't make it any better. Having greed do it versus some intentional harm, it doesn't make me feel any better. So I would, oh yeah, they actually append her full paper below in this one. So I do not need to give you the extra thing. But again, I encourage you to read this because it really shows just how obvious in some ways. And I gave you a nice overview. This is a lab-created virus. She debunks the other explanations and excuses. And I thought I would just end on this, which says, because this you see as an exercise in critical media literacy. Here's how you can oftentimes determine whether or not someone's talking crap, okay? Here's the Science Media Center trying to debunk this very well-constructed paper from someone intimately qualified and intimately involved with the researchers dealing with this in the Wuhan Virology Institute. And you notice something here. They try to list a bunch of experts saying, no. This paper by Lee, okay, unusual features, right, of SARS-CoV-2 suggesting sophisticated laboratory modification rather than natural evolution. What does this person say? Okay, it says, in our peer-reviewed paper, we analyzed SARS-CoV-2 genome in comparison with available coronavirus symptoms, okay, and then just go on. And it just says related coronaviruses have been retrieved from animals. It doesn't actually address any of the content she brings up, okay, because they used a bat coronavirus that was by far 96% involved in this, okay, and was being conducted in that same lab. Doesn't address that. What a coincidence. And another one says it's just contentious. For my taste, this is another professor, for my taste, the bulk of the data fit with the consensus that this is a virus transferred to humans. Okay, where's your logic? What data are you referring to? Nothing. He's basically saying, in my opinion. Your opinion is not worth crap if you can't go into any data or point to anything. Again, people keep saying, they use words like consensus. They use things like, oh, conspiracy theory. I'd love to throw that in. It's reminiscent of a conspiracy theory. So, and then he tries to bring the politics into it. Says this person is associated with a website that says that it is there to permit the people of China to live under a national system based on the rule of law, independent of the political system, right? And then it says, given the unsubstantiated claims in the publication, which has not been peer reviewed, the report cannot be viewed with any credibility as it stands. Again, never addressing the points brought up, the very scientific and particular points brought up, talking about markers, talking about the specific viruses, talking about analysis of the virus. And if you go down here, it goes on and on and on. It's not peer reviewed, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody actually addresses the paper. Whenever you see someone criticizing their political affiliation, using words like conspiracy theory, saying my opinion is, my professional opinion is, and words like consensus, all you see is excuse making and covering up. Use this as a way and as a skill when you find other issues, other people, and other studies that you come across. Look at what they're addressing. If they cannot address the scientific facts and data, if they're driven by greed, by corporate profit, by scientific arrogance, wanting to be the best in the field, it creates new viruses that they can patent and maybe get profits from, they're compromised. Those things prevent scientific objectivity, and they also prevent pro-human healthy responses because they want to be able to use their discoveries to make money, or they want to use it to put themselves above other people. And they want to maintain their prestige. These scientists have failed, and they don't want to admit that they failed. Now, if you're going to be a real scientist, you invite failure and open recognition of that because it's part of the scientific method, it's part of testing hypothesis, it's part of eliminating false premises and false understanding. If you're not, if you're addicted to your reputation, if you're addicted to being right all the time, then you need not to be a scientist or a journalist or making any claims whatsoever. So I'll end with that. Again, I encourage all of you to understand that this is not medical advice. This is information. It's meant to equip you for making your own decision, to bring this information together, not to be fear-based and not to be ignorance-based. And I will say this again. We have a lot of fear, especially in America, and ignorance. We have fear peddling vaccines, stay home, on the neoliberal side of things in America. And we have ignorance. COVID-19 is just a conspiracy, et cetera, et cetera. We can use hydroxychloroquine and it'll all go away. That ignorance, and don't use masks, by the way. It's against my freedom on the alt-right or neoconservative side. Those are both wrong and both deadly and both blind ways to do with it, okay? I have another video saying, what are the various therapies and what are the most effective? And I can tell you right now, the most effective way to deal with this virus is first and foremost, not to engage in fear and not to engage in ignorance. Ignorance can kill you, okay? Like some of these church leaders who encouraged no person to wear masks and then ended up getting the virus and dying, thinking it was just a conspiracy. And fear will kill you because fear creates a condition in your body of anxiety and stress, which is absolutely the worst thing you can do when engaging this virus. Clear-minded, non-fear, not knowledgeable and aware, okay, versus ignorant, straightforward and looking at the opportunity this virus presents to us to understand the importance of our own health system and the way in which we conduct our life is the way forward. So I encourage each of you to take this information, integrate it, critique it, look for other sources, but understand that ultimately the responsibility does lie with you. It lies with you in terms of your own personal health, with the people that you choose as your political leaders, with the people you associate with, okay? Don't allow yourself to be manipulated and persuaded from simple outside forces using either fear or ignorance. Use your mind, use your heart, use your spirit to create a good life. And in the end, just like Zero Hedge said, we all do die in the end. The point here is to have a high quality life that's contributing to society and allowing us to have that healthy, vibrant while we're on this planet. So I hope that this video has been helpful, and I hope that COVID-19 has been helpful in revealing what it is that we now have to look at as important. So there is an opportunity to see the blessing in this, and to the extent it maybe occurs, to use best scientific practices and clear thinking to address that the best we can. So again, thank you for watching. I encourage you to subscribe below. If you want to put a small donation, there is a donation button here on this YouTube website. And please be welcome to comment and engage this conversation further. Thank you very much again for watching. This is Dr. Zeus, aka Citizen Zeus, signing off.